Federal agents moved in quietly, but the fallout is anything but. According to U.S. authorities, an FBI raid has exposed what investigators describe as an $85 million trucking fraud scheme, allegedly tied to a Somali-linked network operating across multiple states. What began as suspicious paperwork and delayed payments has now exploded into a full-scale federal investigation, raising serious questions about how such a massive scam was able to operate inside the U.S. logistics industry for years. Investigators say the alleged scheme exploited the backbone of American commerce, trucking and freight transportation, using fake carriers, falsified records, and complex financial maneuvers to siphon millions of dollars from brokers, shippers, and legitimate operators. The sheer size of the alleged fraud has stunned industry experts who warn that trucking scams are becoming increasingly sophisticated and harder to detect. Tonight, we break down what federal officials have confirmed, what the FBI allegedly uncovered during the raid, and why this case is now being described as one of the most significant trucking-related fraud investigations in recent years. This is not just a financial crime story, it's a warning about vulnerabilities in the supply chain that move America's goods every single day.
According to federal authorities and court records, the FBI raid that triggered this investigation was the result of months and possibly years of intelligence gathering focused on what officials describe as an alleged large-scale trucking fraud operation. Investigators believe the network operated by creating or controlling multiple trucking entities that appeared legitimate on paper but were allegedly used to defraud freight brokers and logistics companies. These entities, authorities say, would accept shipping contracts, collect payments, and then either fail to deliver cargo or reroute funds through layered accounts before disappearing. Federal officials state that the alleged operation relied heavily on falsified documentation, including fake carrier credentials, insurance certificates, and registration records. By exploiting trust-based systems within the freight industry, investigators say the network was able to secure contracts quickly and repeatedly. Once payments were processed, funds were allegedly moved through a web of bank accounts designed to obscure their origin and destination. Authorities estimate the total losses linked to the scheme could reach $85 million, placing the case among the largest trucking fraud investigations ever pursued by federal law enforcement. The FBI's involvement signals the seriousness of the allegations. Unlike smaller fraud cases typically handled at the civil level, this investigation involves potential federal crimes, including wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Officials emphasize that no final charges have yet been announced, and that all individuals connected to the case are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in court. Industry experts say the case highlights a growing crisis within the trucking and logistics sector. As digital platforms and rapid contract systems have expanded, so too have opportunities for fraud. Federal authorities warn that criminal networks increasingly target these systems because of high transaction volumes and limited real-time verification. As the investigation continues, officials caution that the full scope of the alleged scheme may not yet be known. What has already emerged, however, paints a troubling picture of how deeply fraudulent operations can embed themselves within critical U.S. infrastructure before being detected. As investigators expanded the scope of the probe, attention turned to how the alleged trucking scam was able to operate across state lines without triggering immediate alarms. According to federal sources, the network is believed to have exploited weaknesses in freight broker verification systems, rapidly cycling through company names, phone numbers, and digital profiles to avoid detection. Authorities say these entities often appeared legitimate on industry load boards, complete with convincing paperwork and operational histories that masked their true purpose. Investigators allege that once contracts were secured, the scheme followed a predictable but highly effective pattern. Payments would be routed through multiple accounts, sometimes across different states, before brokers or shippers realized something was wrong. In many cases, officials say, victims only discovered the fraud after cargo went missing, deliveries were delayed indefinitely, or communication with the carrier abruptly ceased. By that point, funds had already been dispersed and accounts closed. Federal agents are now reviewing thousands of transactions to determine how the money moved and who controlled the flow. Authorities believe the alleged network relied on layers of intermediaries, including shell businesses and third-party payment services, to distance organizers from direct financial trails. This structure, investigators say, complicates prosecution, but also points to a level of planning inconsistent with small-scale fraud. The interstate nature of the operation elevated the case to a federal level. According to officials, trucking scams that cross state lines and involve electronic communications typically fall under federal jurisdiction, particularly when losses reach tens of millions of dollars. The estimated $85 million figure has intensified scrutiny, prompting coordination between the FBI, financial crime units, and transportation regulators. Industry insiders warn that this case may only represent a fraction of a larger problem. As freight demand surged in recent years, verification processes struggled to keep pace, creating openings for sophisticated fraud rings. Federal authorities say the investigation is now focused not only on identifying those responsible, but also on understanding how similar schemes can be prevented in the future. As the FBI dug deeper, investigators began mapping what they believed to be the organizational structure behind the alleged trucking scam. According to sources familiar with the investigation, the operation appeared to function less like a loose collection of scammers and more like a coordinated enterprise with defined roles and responsibilities. Authorities say some individuals were responsible for setting up carrier identities, others handled communications with brokers, while separate actors managed banking and financial withdrawals. This compartmentalization, investigators believe, allowed the scheme to continue even when individual accounts or companies were flagged. Federal agents are now examining digital communications, call records, and financial data to determine who controlled the alleged network. Investigators believe encrypted messaging platforms and disposable phone numbers may have been used to coordinate activity and evade detection. Officials caution that unraveling these communication trails takes time, but they say early findings suggested deliberate effort to conceal leadership and decision-making authority within the operation. The alleged scale of the fraud has also raised concerns about downstream economic impact. Industry analysts say trucking scams of this magnitude don't just harm individual brokers, they ripple through the supply chain, increasing costs, delaying shipments, and undermining trust across the logistics sector. Smaller operators, in particular, can be devastated by a single fraudulent transaction, making the cumulative effect of an $85 million scheme especially damaging. Federal prosecutors are now assessing whether the evidence supports charges beyond basic fraud, including conspiracy and money laundering. According to legal experts, proving conspiracy requires demonstrating coordination and shared intent among participants, a threshold investigators appear focused on meeting. The complexity of the alleged operation, authorities say, could ultimately strengthen the case if prosecutors can show that the scheme was organized and sustained rather than opportunistic. As evidence continues to be analyzed, officials warn that additional raids, seizures, or arrests are possible. Investigators believe the FBI raid that exposed the alleged scam may have disrupted only part of a broader network. If confirmed, that would mean the case is far from over and that more revelations could still be ahead. As the alleged scope of the trucking scam became clearer, attention shifted towards the regulatory and oversight gaps that may have allowed the operation to flourish. Federal officials and industry experts say the case exposes systemic weaknesses in how freight carriers are vetted and monitored. With the rapid growth of digital freight platforms, background checks and verification processes often rely on automated systems that prioritize speed over depth. Investigators believe the alleged network exploited these conditions, repeatedly re-registering carriers and altering digital footprints faster than safeguards could respond. Transportation regulators are now reportedly cooperating with federal investigators to determine whether existing safeguards were bypassed or manipulated. According to officials, the alleged use of falsified insurance documents and forged credentials points to vulnerabilities that extend beyond individual bad actors. Industry analysts warn that unless verification standards improve, similar schemes could re-emerge under different names, using the same tactics to exploit trust-based logistics systems. The case has also sparked concern among policymakers who see the trucking industry as critical national infrastructure. Disruptions caused by fraud not only lead to financial losses, but can delay essential goods, impact fuel supplies, and destabilize regional economies. Lawmakers from transportation-heavy states are reportedly calling for briefings, urging stronger coordination between federal agencies and private sector platforms to prevent large-scale fraud from embedding itself in supply chains. Within the Somali-American business community, leaders have cautioned against broad generalizations, emphasizing that allegations involve individuals or networks, not communities. Federal authorities have echoed this point, stressing that investigations target specific alleged criminal conduct and should not be misinterpreted as reflective of any lawful ethnic or business group. Maintaining this distinction, authorities say, is essential to preserving trust and cooperation during complex investigations. As scrutiny intensifies, the trucking scam case is increasingly viewed as a test of whether enforcement, regulation, and industry practices can adapt to modern fraud threats.
Authorities say the lessons learned here could reshape how freight fraud is detected and prosecuted nationwide. As the investigation moves into its next phase, federal authorities are signaling that the FBI raid may represent only the beginning of a much broader enforcement effort. Prosecutors are now reviewing extensive evidence seized during the operation, including financial records, digital communications, banking data, and corporate filings tied to the alleged trucking entities. Officials caution that cases involving complex, multi-state fraud schemes of this scale often take significant time to prosecute, particularly when money laundering and conspiracy charges are under consideration. If investigators are able to substantiate the full scope of the alleged $85 million trucking scam, the case could become one of the most consequential freight fraud prosecutions in recent U.S. history. Legal experts note that convictions in such cases often lead to long prison sentences, asset forfeitures, and permanent bans from operating in regulated industries. Beyond criminal penalties, the case could also trigger civil lawsuits from brokers and logistics firms seeking to recover losses. Federal officials have emphasized that all individuals connected to the investigation are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in court. While the allegations alone have sent shockwaves through the trucking industry, authorities stress that accountability must be established through evidence, not speculation. Maintaining due process, they say, is critical to ensuring that justice is both effective and credible. What is already clear is the broader warning this case delivers. Investigators say modern fraud networks are increasingly sophisticated, capable of embedding themselves within essential industries while exploiting speed, trust, and digital systems. The trucking sector, which moves the backbone of the American economy, has now become a prime target, making vigilance and reform more urgent than ever. As federal agents continue to follow the money and unravel the alleged network, the case stands as a stark reminder of how vulnerable critical infrastructure can be when criminal innovation outpaces oversight. The outcome of this investigation may not only determine accountability, it could reshape how freight fraud is detected and prevented nationwide.